The warm glow of the chandeliers in the grand banquet hall did little to ease the chill creeping through Olivia's veins. The room was filled with applause, laughter, and the clinking of glasses as Richard made his grand declaration. Daniel stood beside him, feigning modesty, while Olivia's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. She had built this business. She had given it everything: her time, her youth, her passion. And yet, in a single moment, it had been stripped away. Daniel has shown tremendous potential, Richard said, pride swelling in his voice. He will lead our company into the future. Tremendous potential? Olivia almost laughed. Daniel had spent years partying, gambling, and running from responsibility. He only showed up when he needed money. But here he was, being rewarded for nothing. Her father's words blurred into background noise as she forced a smile, nodding as if she wasn't unraveling inside. The guests turned to her, waiting for a reaction. She knew they expected her to object, to protest, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, she raised her glass. "To Daniel," she said, her voice steady. "May he bring the company as much success as it brought my father." The applause resumed, but Olivia had already checked out. She needed air. Slipping away from the table, she made her way to the balcony, the city lights flickering in the distance. The weight of betrayal pressed down on her chest. She had given up everything for this business: her social life, her chance at a family, her dreams of traveling. All for what? To be tossed aside like she was nothing? She took a shaky breath, gripping the railing. Fine, she thought. If this is how they want it, I'll step back, but I won't forget, and neither will they. As she turned to leave, she caught Daniel watching her from across the room. He smirked, raising his glass. He knew exactly what he had done. That night, Olivia lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The storm inside her refused to settle. But little did she know, karma was already at work, and soon her father and cousin would come begging for the help they had once taken for granted. The following morning, Olivia made herself a strong cup of coffee, determined to shake off the weight of last night's humiliation. She had always been practical. She wouldn't waste time wallowing. The company was out of her hands now. She needed to move forward. But the world wasn't ready to let her forget. Her phone buzzed. A message from Claire, one of the department heads she had worked closely with. "We need to talk. It's already starting to fall apart." Olivia's heart clenched, but she forced herself to remain neutral. She wouldn't let hope creep in, not yet. She agreed to meet Claire for lunch, and when she arrived at the quiet cafe, she saw the exhaustion in Claire's eyes before she even spoke. Daniel's first decision as CEO, Claire began, stirring her untouched coffee, was to fire the finance manager. Olivia blinked. "What?" Claire let out a sharp breath. "Said he was too slow and that he'd bring in someone more aggressive." Olivia felt the first stirrings of unease. That manager had been with them for years. He knew the business inside and out. "And?" Olivia prompted. Claire hesitated. "He hired his friend, some guy named Mason, no experience in hospitality, just a finance bro who," she lowered her voice, "was fired from his last job for unethical practices." Olivia leaned back, gripping her cup. This wasn't just Daniel being reckless. This was dangerous. "Does my father know?" she asked. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. "He's ignoring it. Richard is still the public face, but Daniel is making all the real decisions now. He's throwing money at growth projects without thinking them through. He's ignoring the staff, canceling pre-approved budgets, and..." She sighed, shaking her head. "He wants to rebrand the entire company. New name, new image. He says it's outdated." A cold pit formed in Olivia's stomach. "He's erasing my father's legacy," she murmured. Claire nodded. "And running it into the ground while he's at it." Olivia sat in silence for a long moment, stirring her coffee absently. A part of her wanted to ignore it. to let the business crumble. Let them see what happens without me. But another part of her, the one that had spent years building it, refused to look away. "You're not planning to intervene, are you?" Claire asked, watching her carefully. Olivia exhaled slowly. "Number not yet." Because she didn't need to. Not when karma was already knocking on Daniel's door. 2 weeks had passed since the humiliating announcement, and Olivia had done her best to move on. She focused on herself, exercising more, reading books she never had time for, even reconnecting with old friends. But no matter how much she tried to distance herself, the business still found a way to creep back into her life. Her phone rang one evening as she was preparing dinner. "Claire," she hesitated before answering. "Hey, are you sitting down?" Claire's voice was tight, urgent. Olivia frowned. "Why?" "Because you're going to want to be when I tell you what Daniel just did." Olivia turned off the stove. "Go on." Claire took a deep breath. "He took out a private loan. Millions, Olivia. He's calling it an expansion strategy. He's planning to acquire 2 failing boutique hotels in Miami, thinking he can turn them around and double the company's revenue in 6 months." Olivia's stomach twisted. She gripped the counter. "Please tell me you're joking." "I wish I was." "He didn't—" Olivia pinched the bridge of her nose. "He didn't even consult the board, did he?" "He didn't." "And the worst part? The company's financials are already stretched thin because of his ridiculous rebranding efforts. If those hotels don't turn a profit immediately, we'll be drowning in debt." Olivia exhaled sharply. This was beyond reckless. This was dangerous. "And where's my father in all this?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Claire hesitated. "He's conflicted. He doesn't like the idea, but he won't step in. He keeps saying he needs to give Daniel space to prove himself." Olivia clenched her jaw. "Prove himself? He's gambling with everything my father spent his life building." "I know," Claire said quietly. "That's why I'm calling you. Because I think you're the only one who can stop this before it's too late." Olivia ran a hand through her hair, staring at her reflection in the kitchen window. She had sworn she wouldn't get involved. She had told herself it wasn't her problem anymore. But if Daniel kept going down this path, there wouldn't be a business left to save. She tightened her grip on the phone. "I need to see the company's financials." Claire sounded relieved. "I'll send you everything I have." Hanging up, Olivia stood in silence for a long moment, her mind racing. Daniel was digging himself, and the company, into a hole he wouldn't be able to climb out of. And when he finally hit rock bottom, he'd have no choice but to turn to her. Olivia sat in front of her laptop, the dim light of her apartment casting long shadows on the walls. The financial documents Claire had sent over were open on her screen, each number worse than the last. Daniel had burned through company funds at an alarming rate. Between the rebranding campaign, hiring unqualified friends, and the acquisition of the failing Miami hotels, the company was hemorrhaging money. But the real nightmare? He had leveraged the company's assets to secure the loan. If the Miami hotels didn't turn a profit soon, the company wouldn't just struggle, it would collapse. She rubbed her temples. Unbelievable. A notification popped up on her phone. A news article. She clicked on it, and her stomach dropped. CEO of Sterling Hotels under fire for controversial takeover deal. The article detailed how Daniel had made an impulsive, overvalued acquisition of the Miami hotels without proper financial analysis. Industry experts called it a reckless gamble that could backfire spectacularly. Investors were already uneasy. Her phone buzzed again. Claire. "Did you see it?" Claire asked without preamble. "Yes," Olivia sighed. "And I checked the numbers. If he doesn't turn those hotels around immediately, the company is done." "That's not the worst part." Claire's voice was tense. "There's a problem with the deal itself." Olivia frowned. "What kind of problem?" The sellers misrepresented their financials. The hotels are in even worse shape than they claimed. The moment investors find out, stocks will plummet. There's a lawsuit brewing, Olivia. Olivia closed her eyes. This wasn't just incompetence, it was disaster. And then Claire said the words Olivia had been dreading. Richard finally confronted Daniel. Olivia sat up straighter. And? It was bad, Claire whispered. Daniel lost it. He accused Richard of not trusting him, of holding him back. He said this was the future and that Richard needed to step aside. Olivia clenched her jaw. And my father? He stormed out. I've never seen him so angry. But Olivia? Claire hesitated. I think he's scared. He knows he made a mistake, but he doesn't know how to fix it. A long silence stretched between them. Then Claire spoke the words Olivia had been avoiding. You need to come back. Olivia exhaled slowly. She had told herself she was done, that this wasn't her fight. But the truth was, she couldn't sit back and watch everything crumble. Not when the business her mother and father built was at stake. Not when Daniel was about to lose everything. And not when, deep down, she knew, sooner or later, they'd all come begging for her help. The first domino fell just 3 days later. Olivia had been tracking the company's financial situation from a distance, reading every investor report, every news article, every insider tip that Claire sent her way. And then, on a Wednesday morning, it happened. Sterling Hotel's stock price dropped 17% in a single day. The moment investors caught wind of the looming lawsuit and Daniel's reckless acquisitions, they panicked. Some pulled out completely, others demanded answers. The board was in chaos. Executives scrambled to reassure investors, but the truth was clear. There was no plan, no strategy, only damage control. That afternoon, Olivia's phone rang. Her father. She let it ring twice before answering. Hello? A heavy silence. Then, a sigh. Olivia? His voice was hoarse, tired. I need to see you. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. She had been waiting for this. I don't think that's a good idea, Dad. Please. His voice cracked. I made a mistake. She let that hang in the air for a moment before responding. What kind of mistake? Another sigh. Everything. The company is in free fall. The board is losing faith in Daniel. The investors are furious. And... He hesitated. I should have never given it to him. The words were heavy, full of regret. Olivia leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. So, this is what it took for him to admit it. I don't know how to fix this, Richard admitted. I thought Daniel would, rise to the occasion, but he's not ready. And now, everything your mother and I built is at risk. She felt a sharp pang at the mention of her mother. The business had been her mother's dream, just as much as her father's. And now, because of Daniel's arrogance, it was unraveling. Finally, she spoke. What do you want from me, Dad? Another pause. Then the words she had known were coming. I need you to come back. Olivia's grip tightened around her phone. A part of her wanted to say no, to tell him he had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. But another part, the part that had spent years keeping that business afloat, knew the truth. If she didn't step in, there might not be anything left to save. She exhaled slowly. I'll think about it. Richard sounded relieved. Thank you. But Olivia wasn't doing this for him. She was doing it for herself, for the company she had poured her soul into, for the legacy her mother had wanted to build, and most of all, she was doing it because she knew Daniel wasn't done destroying everything yet. The tension in the boardroom was suffocating. The long mahogany table, once a place of structured discussions and calculated decisions, now felt like a battlefield. Olivia sat across from Daniel, her posture composed but unyielding. Her father was beside her, his face pale, his fingers twitching against the table's edge. Claire sat on her other side, her eyes darting between the executives as they whispered in low, anxious tones. Daniel, however, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his smirk barely contained. "So, let me get this straight," he drawled, tapping his fingers against the polished wood. "You want to bring Olivia back? To do what, exactly? Micromanage me?" Olivia didn't rise to the bait. She met his gaze evenly. "To save the company before you finish destroying it." The room fell into a dead silence. Daniel scoffed. "That's rich, coming from you. You weren't even here when we made these deals." "You walked away." "I walked away because it wasn't my fight," Olivia said calmly. "But now, thanks to you, the company is weeks away from financial ruin." A muscle twitched in Daniel's jaw. He turned to the board members, playing to his audience. "And you all just think she can swoop in and fix this?" One of the older executives cleared his throat. "We think something needs to be done. Investors are rattled, Daniel. Your decisions," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "have put the company in a precarious position." Daniel let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, come on. You think one bad press cycle means the company is doomed? This is just a rough patch. We just need time." "Time," Olivia repeated, tilting her head. "That's an interesting concept. How do you plan to buy time when the company's debt is mounting, when the banks start calling, when the lawsuit over the Miami deal officially lands on your desk?" Daniel's expression darkened. "I know what I'm doing." "Then prove it." Olivia folded her hands together. "Show us your recovery plan." Another silence. Daniel's smirk faltered. He had nothing. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, finally spoke. "Daniel, we've given you time. You have yet to present us with a concrete strategy to mitigate these losses. If Olivia has a solution, I believe we owe it to the company to hear her out." Daniel clenched his jaw. His control was slipping, and he knew it. Finally, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You want back in? Fine. But don't think for a second that I'm going down without a fight." Olivia didn't flinch. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Olivia sat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by the company's top executives, her father and, most importantly, the board. Daniel sat across from her, arms folded, his smirk gone. The meeting had begun, and now it was Olivia's turn to speak. She clicked the remote in her hand, bringing up a presentation on the screen. "Let's get to the point," she began, her voice steady. "The company is hemorrhaging money. If we don't act now, we'll be bankrupt within 6 months." Murmurs spread across the room. Some of the executives shifted uncomfortably. Daniel, however, scoffed. "Dramatic much?" She ignored him. "Our biggest immediate threats are twofold: the lawsuit over the Miami hotels and the mounting debt from reckless spending. If investors pull out completely, we won't have time to recover. Which is why we need to move quickly." She clicked to the next slide. "I have a 3-phase recovery plan." The board members leaned in. "First, we stabilize," she continued. "That means pausing any unnecessary spending, freezing Daniel's expansion projects, and renegotiating loan terms before the banks take legal action." Daniel sat up straighter. "You can't just pause my expansion projects." "I can," she cut in. "And I will, if we want this company to survive." The head of the board, an older man named Charles, nodded. "Go on." Olivia changed the slide. "Phase 2. We rebuild investor confidence. That means transparency. We need to release an official statement acknowledging past mistakes and outlining our new strategy. Investors don't just need reassurance. They need proof we have a plan." Several board members exchanged looks, nodding in agreement. Daniel, however, was turning red. This is absurd. The final phase, Olivia continued undeterred, is restructuring. We reevaluate leadership, cut dead weight, and shift focus back to what made this company successful in the first place: high-quality service and smart growth. She let that sink in before delivering the final blow. And that begins with Daniel stepping down as CEO. The silence was deafening. Daniel shot up from his chair, slamming his palms on the table. "You've got to be kidding me." Olivia met his glare, unflinching. "This isn't personal, Daniel. It's about the company." "Like hell it isn't personal," he spat. "You've wanted this since day one. Well, newsflash, princess, you walked away. You lost your shot." She inhaled sharply, but kept her composure. "I didn't walk away, Daniel. I was pushed out." The board members shifted uncomfortably, but Olivia could see it in their faces. They knew she was right. Charles cleared his throat. "Daniel, Olivia makes a valid point. The company's survival is our top priority." "So that's it?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "You're just going to let her waltz back in and take over?" "We haven't decided anything yet," Charles said. "But we need to consider all options." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't over." Then, without another word, he stormed out. Olivia exhaled slowly. She had made her first move, but Daniel wasn't done fighting. And she had just painted a target on her back. 2 days later, Olivia woke to an urgent call from Claire. "You need to check the news, now." Still groggy, Olivia grabbed her laptop and opened the business headlines. Her breath caught in her throat as she read, "Sterling Hotels faces internal war. CEO Daniel Sterling accuses cousin of corporate sabotage." Her heart pounded as she clicked the article. Daniel had gone to the press. In a series of exclusive interviews, he painted Olivia as a bitter, former executive who was trying to undermine his leadership for personal gain. He claimed she was orchestrating a coup within the company, manipulating the board, and feeding negative stories to investors. "The truth is, Olivia walked away from this company," Daniel was quoted saying. "And now that she sees me taking it to new heights, she wants back in. But I won't let my family's legacy be hijacked by someone who never believed in my vision." Olivia's fingers tightened into fists. "That snake." Claire's voice pulled her back. "He's trying to turn public opinion against you. Investors are already panicking, and the board is rattled. Some of them are worried about the bad press. Daniel is making it look like this is a personal feud instead of a business decision." Olivia forced herself to take a deep breath. This was exactly the kind of move she should have expected from Daniel. When backed into a corner, he wouldn't take responsibility. He would shift the blame. But she wasn't going to let him win. "Schedule a press conference," she said, her voice steel. Claire hesitated. "Are you sure? If you go public, this turns into an all-out war." Olivia's jaw tightened. "It already is." That afternoon, Olivia stood in front of a row of microphones, cameras flashing as reporters called out questions. She took a measured breath and began. "I never wanted this to become a public battle," she said. "But I won't stand by while my integrity is questioned." She glanced directly at the cameras, knowing Daniel was watching. "This is not about personal ambition. It's about responsibility. The company is in crisis, and leadership matters. I am not here to fight for control. I am here to fight for its survival." Her voice didn't waver. "The numbers don't lie. The reckless financial decisions, the crumbling investor confidence, the legal threats, these are the issues we should be discussing, not a manufactured family feud." The murmurs in the room shifted. She was redirecting the narrative, and then she delivered the final blow. "I welcome full transparency. If Daniel is confident in his leadership, I invite him to present his financial recovery plan publicly. Let the investors, the board, and the employees see exactly how he plans to turn this company around. A challenge, a spotlight. Daniel thrived in chaos, but he had no real plan, and Olivia had just forced him into a position where he couldn't hide. Now, all she had to do was wait. The boardroom was packed. Investors, executives, and key stakeholders sat in tense silence as Daniel paced at the front, his usual arrogance replaced with something closer to agitation. A giant screen displayed the financial charts. Red numbers, declining trends, warning signs. The weight of reality pressed down on him. He had prepared for this moment, but not well enough. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, clearing his throat, "I stand before you today not to defend myself, but to defend the vision of Sterling Hotels." Olivia sat near the front, arms crossed, watching him closely. She had been waiting for this. Daniel turned to the charts. Yes, the company has faced setbacks, but every great empire experiences turbulence before its rise. "What I have built." "Built?" Olivia interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "Or inherited?" A few murmurs spread through the room. Daniel clenched his jaw. He forced a smile. "What I lead," he corrected. "Sterling Hotels is in a temporary downturn, but I have secured partnerships and long-term strategies that will ensure its growth." He clicked to a slide that showed projections of an alleged turnaround. "Within a year, we will not only recover, but expand. Our recent acquisitions," a sharp voice cut in from the side, one of the investors. "What partnerships, Daniel?" The Miami hotels were supposed to be profitable within 6 months. Instead, they're bleeding cash. And the lawsuit over that deal, still unresolved. Daniel hesitated for half a second before recovering. "We are in negotiations to..." Another board member cut in. "With who?" "Because the latest reports show no active negotiations, no secured funding, and no risk mitigation strategy. What exactly is your plan?" Daniel's face flushed. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Olivia leaned forward. "We're all waiting, Daniel." He exhaled sharply, trying to regain control. I have a plan, but certain details are confidential at this stage." A laugh came from the back of the room. Charles, the head of the board, leaned forward. "Daniel, you don't have a plan." The room fell into silence. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. "I just need time." "No," Olivia said, standing up. "Time isn't the issue, leadership is. This company needs a real plan, and it needs it now." She turned to the board. Daniel was given a chance to prove himself. The result? A failing acquisition, lost investor confidence, reckless spending, and a tanking stock price. Richard, her father, finally spoke. His voice was low, but firm. "Daniel, it's time to step down." Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" "I gave you a chance," Richard continued. "I wanted you to succeed, but this company, my company, is at risk because of your decisions. You're not fit to lead it." The silence was deafening. Then, Charles turned to the rest of the board. "I motion to remove Daniel as CEO, effective immediately." One by one, the board members nodded in agreement. Daniel's face drained of color. No, you can't. This is a vote," Charles continued. "All in favor?" Hands shot up around the room. A majority. It was over. Daniel stumbled back a step, his mouth opening and closing, searching for an argument, for anything to save himself. But there was nothing left to say. He had lost. Olivia watched him, her heart steady. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. And for the first time in a long time, Sterling Hotels was in the right hands. The executive offices felt different when Olivia walked in the next morning. The tension that had once clung to the walls like smoke had lifted, replaced by an almost eerie quiet. Daniel was gone. She stepped into the CEO's office, the one that should have been hers from the beginning. Papers were scattered across the desk, remnants of Daniel's failed leadership. A bottle of expensive whiskey sat half empty on the side table. She exhaled slowly, rolling her shoulders back. No more looking back, only forward. The door creaked open, and Richard stepped inside. He looked older than she remembered, the weight of regret carved into his features. "You made the right choice," he said, his voice low. Olivia studied him for a moment. "Did I?" Richard sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I should have given this to you from the start." She leaned against the desk. "Why didn't you?" A long silence. Then, finally, he spoke. "Because I was afraid." She raised an eyebrow. "Afraid?" He nodded. "Afraid of losing you. After your mother died, this company became everything to me. I didn't want to put that burden on you. And when Daniel came along, so full of confidence, I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, it was the right choice." His voice wavered. "I was wrong." Olivia took a slow breath. The anger she had carried for so long was still there, but beneath it, something else stirred. Understanding. "Dad," she said finally, "I didn't need you to protect me. I needed you to believe in me." Richard's shoulders sagged. "I know." For the first time in years, there was honesty between them. But there was no time to dwell on the past. The company was still on the brink of collapse, and Olivia had work to do. By the afternoon, she had called an emergency meeting with the executives. The rebuilding process had to start immediately. Phase 1. Stabilization. She reinstated financial oversight, reversing Daniel's reckless spending and cutting ties with his unqualified hires. The Miami hotels? They had to be sold off before the lawsuit spiraled out of control. Phase 2. Restoring trust. She held investor meetings, not with empty promises, but with transparency. She acknowledged the mistakes, detailed the company's plan for recovery, and assured them that Sterling Hotels was no longer in freefall. Phase 3. A new future. This was the most difficult part. Redefining the company, returning to what made it great. She revamped internal operations, focusing on quality over reckless expansion. And slowly, but surely, Sterling Hotels began to heal. 6 months later, the stock price was rising, investor confidence was returning. The lawsuit over the Miami hotels had been settled. It wasn't easy, but Olivia had done what Daniel never could. She had led. One evening, as she was finishing up paperwork, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A familiar voice came through. Weak, defeated. "Olivia." She straightened. "Daniel?" Silence. Then a hollow laugh. "Guess you got what you wanted, huh?" She closed her eyes briefly. "I didn't want this, Daniel. I wanted the company to survive." Another pause, then softer. "I messed up." Olivia didn't respond. He already knew the answer. "I need help," he admitted finally. His voice cracked. "I don't know what to do next." For a brief moment, she considered hanging up, leaving him to deal with the consequences of his actions. But then, she took a breath. "Daniel!" Yeah? "You'll figure it out." She ended the call. Then, for the first time in a long time, she leaned back in her chair and smiled.